My dream is to be international star.
But it was so fast. Everything was like fast, 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 fast.
It was not only the voice, it was her determination and the fact that her family supported her so much.
I fell in love as a woman to this man. I was holding on to him and not to my singing career anymore.
There are moments in a person's life that were never meant to be seen. Moments so private, so raw, so completely unguarded, that the very idea of another set of eyes on them feels like a violation of something sacred. Most people go their entire lives without having those moments exposed. But when you are one of the most famous human beings on the planet, the walls around your private life are always thinner than they appear. Celine Dion had spent decades building something extraordinary in public. A voice that stopped people in their tracks. A career that crossed every border and broke every record. A love story with her husband Rene Angelil that the world had watched and admired for years. But inside the walls of their private life, something was happening that nobody outside was supposed to know about. Rene had recorded it. He had done it quietly, carefully, and with a tenderness that he never fully explained even to her. And when that recording found its way out into the world, Celine Dion felt something crack inside her that took a very long time to put back together. What was on that recording? Why did Rene make it? And who let it out? Before we dive into video, please subscribe to our channel. The Woman Band, the Voice. To understand why the leak of that recording hurt Celine Dion so deeply, you first need to understand something about who she actually was beneath the performances and the gowns and the standing ovations. Celine Marie Claudette Dion was born in March 1968 in Charlemagne, Quebec. She was the youngest of 14 children in a family that had very little money, but an enormous amount of music. Her parents, Ademar and Therese, ran a small club called Les Vieux Barrels, where the family performed together on weekends. Celine grew up surrounded by siblings in a house where music was not a hobby or a career aspiration. It was simply the language the family spoke most fluently. She was different from the beginning. Her voice as a child was not just good. It was the kind of thing that made adults stop what they were doing and pay attention. There was a quality to it that had no easy explanation. A combination of technical ability and emotional weight that most singers spend entire careers trying to develop and never fully achieve. Celine had it naturally and completely before she was old enough to understand what it meant. But here is what most people who only knew her voice did not understand about Celine Dion. She was profoundly shy. Not performer shy, not the kind of shyness that dissolves the moment the spotlight comes on. The real kind. The kind that made large gatherings uncomfortable and strangers exhausting and the ordinary social performances of daily life genuinely difficult. The stage was the one place where she felt completely free. Everywhere else she was navigating a world that did not come naturally to her. This is important, because it means that the private spaces in her life were not just preferred, they were necessary. They were the places where she could exist without the performance, without the voice and the presence and the enormous weight of being Celine Dion. At home, she was just a person, a wife, a mother, a woman who laughed at things that would never make the newspapers and cried at things that the public would not have predicted and existed in the ordinary, beautiful, mundane texture of a private life. That private life was everything to her, and what happened with that recording reached directly into the heart of it. Rene and Celine. The real story. The love story between Celine Dion and Rene Angelil is one that the world has summarized many times and understood partially at best. The surface version goes like this. Celine was 12 years old when her mother sent a demo tape to Rene Angelil, who was already an established music manager in Quebec. Rene listened to the tape and was so moved that he mortgaged his house to fund her first album. He became her manager. He shaped her career. Over time, the professional relationship became something else. They fell in love. They married in 1994 in a ceremony that was broadcast on Canadian television and watched by millions of people. They had children. They built a life together that was by every visible measure a genuine and devoted partnership. But the real story was more complicated and more beautiful than the surface version. Rene was 26, years older than Celine. When she was a child, he was a middle-aged man. When she was a young woman finding her footing in the world, he was already fully formed in ways she was still discovering. This gap created a dynamic that was easy to misread from the outside, and that both of them spent years quietly defending against misunderstanding. What the people closest to them consistently described was something that resisted easy categorization. Rene was not just her manager or her husband. He was the person who had believed in her completely when she was still figuring out how to believe in herself. He had taken a financial risk on her talent when she was 12 years old and had never stopped betting on her. That kind of faith leaves a mark on a person. It creates a bond that is partly love and partly gratitude, and partly something that does not have a clean name in any language. And Celine loved him with a totality that people who witnessed it found genuinely moving. She did not perform that love for cameras. She did not reference it strategically in interviews to make herself seem more relatable. It was simply present in the way she spoke about him, and the way she spoke to him, and the way she organized her entire life around the fact of his existence in it. When it got out, grief does something to a person's defenses. It is not just the sadness. It is the way that sadness occupies so much of your available energy that the careful management of your public life becomes harder to maintain. Celine Dion was grieving a man who had been present in her life for 35 years. Her manager, her husband, the father of her children. The person who had looked at a 12-year-old girl singing into a tape recorder and seen what she would become before she could see it herself. She was not in a position to protect everything. Someone who had access to the recordings Rene had made, and the details of exactly who and exactly how have never been fully confirmed publicly, allowed some of that material to find its way out, not to a major media outlet in a formal way. It moved the way private things always move when they escape containment. Quietly at first, then faster, then everywhere. When Celine became aware that material from inside her private life had been exposed, she experienced something that went beyond the ordinary violation of a privacy breach, because this was not paparazzi photographs or intercepted communications or the calculated leak of a disgruntled employee. This was Rene. This was the recordings he had made with love and intention in the private space of their shared life. This was material that existed because of his tenderness and his awareness that time was running out and his desire to preserve something true about the woman he loved. And someone had taken that and given it to the world without asking what she felt. People who were close to Celine during this period describe her reaction not as anger in the ordinary sense. Anger implies a heat that burns itself out. What Celine felt was colder and more permanent than anger. It was a sense of betrayal that reached all the way back through her grief and touched the recordings themselves. It threatened to contaminate something Rene had made with love by attaching the memory of its violation to it. She had been given something extraordinary and private by a man who was no longer alive to explain why he had made it or what he had intended for it. And before she had finished finding her way through the shock of losing him, someone had decided that the world had a right to it. She talked about this in partial ways in the years that followed, never with full specificity, always with a careful management of exactly how much truth she was willing to offer. But the people who knew her well understood that the leak had not simply angered her. It had wounded something in her trust that she was not able to fully repair. She never publicly identified who she believed was responsible. She never made a formal accusation, but the people around her understood that she knew or strongly suspected, and that the knowledge lived in her quietly and persistently, the way these things do when you have no clean resolution for them. The recordings as legacy. Here is the other side of the story, the side that is harder to sit with because it is true and uncomfortable at the same time. The recordings Rene made were extraordinary. The people who heard the private material described something that no professional recording of Celine Dion had ever quite captured. Because professional recordings are by definition controlled, they involve preparation and engineering and the knowledge that what you are producing will be heard by millions of people. That knowledge changes what comes out even when the artist is as gifted as Celine Dion. What Rene recorded was different. It was Celine Dion with all of that awareness removed. singing to herself, singing to her children, singing in the way that people sing when they have forgotten that singing is a thing other people listen to, and the result was something that the people who heard it found almost unbearably moving, because it confirmed what her greatest recordings had always suggested, that the voice existed independently of the performance.